Let's talk about what to do when everything in your life seems broken and you're stuck in a loop that you just can't get out of. My name is Seth. I'm a full-time fantasy author, and I like to make YouTube videos, and I hope you find some value in this one. I want to tell you a little story about a time in my life when I had a lot of bills. This is a pretty common situation. Most people have bills, at least if you're an adult. You've probably had a bill or two in your life, but I had a lot of bills. And I not only had a lot of bills, I had a kind of crappy job. It didn't pay very well. And I ended up having to work really long hours just to make ends meet. And I know I'm not alone in this. I know there are a lot of people who are in that situation. Maybe you're even in that situation today. But I had this problem because not only did I have kind of a crappy job, but I didn't have any skills so that I could go get a better job. And I didn't have any time to develop new skills because I was working all of the time at that other crappy job so that I could pay my bills. And so I was stuck in this loop. Everything in my life just didn't seem to be working the way I was hoping it would, but there was nothing I could do about it, or at least that's how it felt. I was working a job to pay bills, but I had to work all of the time in order to be able to afford those bills, which meant I had no time to spend on skilling up to get a better job to make it easier to pay those bills. And that loop just seemed to go on and on and on forever. So what I want to talk about is the solution that I eventually stumbled into. If you've watched any videos on this channel, you probably are starting to learn that I really like principles. I like principles because I think they're just a better way of living your life than strict rules, because they allow you to flex with changes in situation. But they also give you a set of guidelines or like railings that can keep you going in the right direction. So I want to talk about 3 principles that I learned to embrace over a long time of trial and error and effort that eventually led to me getting out of this situation. The first one was learning to find margin in difficult situations. And so the principle for this that I followed was just that there is always margin. There is always something that can give. So in this case, I was stuck in a situation where I was working like 16 hours a day, and then I would come home and I would have a few hours before I would need to go to bed in order to get enough sleep that I could go and work my job the next day. And I did this day in and day out, sometimes 6 days a week. And then on the days when I wasn't working, I would just literally sleep because I was trying to catch up from all of the sleep that I had missed. And so this created this problem where I couldn't find time to skill up. That is, I couldn't find time to learn the things I would need to learn in order to get a job that wouldn't require me to work so much. And after years of this, and I literally mean years of this, I started to realize something. I started to realize that some of the time that I was jealously guarding in order to try to relax before I went to sleep, or even some of the time when I was asleep, I could use for other things. And now some of you might be thinking to yourself, well, yeah, but I'm in that situation and like, I don't have any time at all. But in that situation, I learned that there is always margin. 5 minutes when you're eating your lunch, 10 minutes between when you get home and when your food is ready, 20 minutes when you're waiting in an appointment room, or even the 10 minutes that it took me to walk from my house to my job, or from my job back to my house. All of those were times that, if I used them judiciously, added up day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. And I realized that my problem wasn't being busy, it was my perspective on being busy. And so that's where this principle comes in, right? There's always margin. There's always something that I can adjust in my life in order to create a better situation, a more optimal situation. And so even though I felt like I was completely stuck and I couldn't move forward at all, that wasn't actually the case. It's just that my progress was going to be a little bit slower than I was hoping it would be. And that brings us actually into the second principle, which I'm sure you've heard me say before. Learn to play the long game. I worked at that job for 6 years. And during those 6 years, I tried a lot of different things. The first few years, I just sort of put my head down and I worked. And then I realized that like, if I didn't make a change, it wasn't going to happen, and I was going to be stuck at this job forever. And so I started making changes, and some of them worked and some of them didn't work, but I played the long game. Instead of trying to achieve instant success, I set myself up so that in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, it would be impossible for me not to have succeeded. But during that time, during those years, I also failed a lot. I also just didn't succeed the way I wanted to succeed. A lot of my efforts to learn new things didn't turn out the way I had hoped. And so every time that happened, even though I was finding the margin where I could squeeze things in and I was playing the long game, I still had to learn a third principle, and that is to face difficulty. You know, we often hear things like, hey, the best things in life are difficult. Nothing good in life comes easy. And unfortunately, it's true. And I wish it wasn't. I sincerely wish it wasn't. But it is true. The best things in life do not come easily. The best relationships in life are hard won. The greatest successes in life are difficult to achieve. For many of us, our proudest moments are when we have done something that other people thought we couldn't. And so what I like to do is I like to take this principle, this grand, big principle, and I like to shrink it down, and I like to apply it to my everyday. If it's true that the greatest successes are going to come off of the back of the greatest difficulty in my life, then sitting down and doing the most difficult thing is going to ultimately bring me the greatest reward. And sometimes that means trying even though you have a high chance of failure. And anytime we start to learn a new thing, anytime we start to improve ourselves, we're going to be facing failure. And I know for me, I didn't want to fail. And so often I just wouldn't even try. And I had to break that mindset. I had to step outside of that and say, no, you know what? I'm going to follow this principle of doing the difficult thing. Mark Twain actually talks about this principle. He says, if you have to eat 2 frogs, make sure you eat the biggest one first. And this frog principle of doing the hardest thing first is really just a good rule to live by. So here's a question you might have. What does this have to do with being an author? Well, this same exact situation happens all of the time in my life with my writing. Now, it's not as grand and big as my situation back then, but it's still the same. You know, I'm in this loop where I have stress in my life and that's stopping me from writing, but then I get stressed about my writing and so I can't write, and it just seems to go on and on forever. But I can use these same principles actually to break out of those loops. The first principle, find margin. There's always something in my life that I can shift and I can improve. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a really small thing. In fact, I'm hugely in favor of small margins, taking those small, tiny little pieces of time or energy or effort or ideas and leveraging those. The second is taking the long game. When I'm stuck in a writing funk where I just can't seem to get my brain into gear because of all of the stress, and then that stress is stopping me from writing, one of the most effective things that I can do is just tell myself it's okay for this to take longer than I was hoping. And this actually works even if you have a deadline coming up. Just say to yourself, you know what, I'm going to figure it out, but I'm also going to breathe. I'm also going to just understand that this might take longer than I was hoping. And then the last thing is learning to face the difficulty, learning to put my butt in the chair and start writing. And even when the ideas aren't coming, to keep my butt in the chair. In fact, these principles are wonderful no matter what kind of negative loop you're facing in your life. If you've gotten any value out of this video, please like and subscribe. And I really hope that you can start taking these principles and applying them to your life to start breaking out of your bad loops.